So hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Future of Work webcast. I'm your Master of Ceremonies, Anil Saxena, and today we have the privilege of having Quentin Sa'Lay, who is the Vice President of HR at Comcast, and he works on the international global focus, working with one of the largest portions of Comcast, and I had the good privilege of working closely with Quentin over the course of my stay at Comcast. And I gotta say, he is not only a really knowledgeable person, but a really nice guy too. So I think we're gonna have a fun conversation. So welcome, Quentin.
Thank you so much, Anil. I am honored to have been asked to participate in this discussion, particularly at such a time like this in our country's history.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the conversation's really apropos, right? Because we're really going to focus today on this idea of leadership and what are some of those kind of key characteristics that will enable teams and organizations to accelerate their performance, as we know that this weirdness might be the new normal. So, right? So let's just start with something around that idea of leadership. So what do you feel like are going to be some of the skills that are going to be necessary for leaders in this new world of work?
Yeah, great question. And I want to start by saying that when I think of this new world of work, we are in such an unprecedented time because we are dealing with what I call not one pandemic, but three. We're dealing with COVID, which is directly related to your question. But in addition to that, there's an economic pandemic that is a result of the impact of COVID-19. And then there's a third pandemic that has not just swept our nation, and I know we'll talk about this a little more, but has also swept the globe as it relates to systemic racism. And so it is an interesting time to be a leader in any organization because you are not just handling one issue. You're handling a culmination of three, and you're doing it all at the same time. Yeah. What I would probably offer to your question, when you talk about the skills that's necessary for leaders in this new world of work, I'm not necessarily convinced that there will be new skills, but I do think there will be an enhancement of skills. I think there will be, not there will be, but there is a greater demand and pull on skill sets that are necessary for leaders to really realize their business objectives. I put it in three buckets. Those three buckets are business skills, people skills, and leadership skills. And just real quickly, I'll point out that under business skills, I think about driving for results, because even in this new normal that we're working in, leaders have to put points on the board. You have to drive results for the organization. And that really means that leaders have to enhance accountability, decision-making, and also asking the right questions to make certain that they are uncovering root causes and problems so that they can get to better solutions. And then the other thing that I think about is knowing the business, but knowing it in a way where leaders have to think and act strategically. And so this is really about the decision-making and the decision-making process, where leaders really have to make decisions to fully understand the business needs and to really push and drive their teams towards those actions that are consistent with what the strategic objectives are.
It's interesting that you say that, right? That notion of the leaning in on the business, and I know there's the other two sort of big areas of concentration, and I feel like there's that extra layer of complication as we think about this idea of remote work and the hybrid that we're going to be dealing with for a long time.
Yeah.
When you think about really leaders driving those kinds of results, what are the issues that you see arising due to that sort of hybrid work environment that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, I see the issues arising around probably 6 areas. Communication, teamwork, decision-making, which I also talked about, problem solving, empowerment, and there's also this overwhelming rising need for leaders to display lots of empathy and emotional intelligence. So when I think about the communication piece, it really requires leaders not only to convey and articulate themselves well, but now in this virtual dynamic, it goes much deeper, where leaders are having to communicate in ways where they are checking for clarity and understanding about what and where they want the employees to focus. They need to be able to communicate by asking questions that bring that clarity and bringing people to and I keep using the word strategic objective because I think everything is linked and connected to that. Also, I mentioned teamwork as being one of those 6. And this is interesting because that teamwork is now directly impacted by distance. And, many organizations have struggled pre-COVID with people working virtually. And now we find ourselves catapulted or thrown into this virtual work dynamic. And so the impact on teamwork is so important because in order to accomplish those goals, and we've talked years about collaboration, well, now you're having to collaborate in different ways. I think about engineers where they would meet in different rooms and get on a whiteboard and start to map out their processes or to map out their designs. Well, that has been directly impacted by this, where they're not able to do that so much virtually. Mm-hmm. Although teams are discovering better and more effective ways to do it by tools that are starting to emerge, such as Whiteboard on Microsoft Teams, Miro, and other tools like that. And then real quickly, I'll hit the other 3, problem solving. The leaders being able to really and collectively talk about what the problems are and how do we work together to get to solutions. People come to us because, they have looked at issues within the organization and they can't find a solution. So what do? They reach out to people within the organization to help them navigate those difficult and challenging issues. And so first and foremost, a successful leader, they have got to be a problem solver, one, so that they can be sought after and at benefit to the organization. And then the last thing that I'll mention that I think is so important, Anil, that a lot of leaders miss is empathy. I mean, just being empathetic to, people who are working remotely, but under many different circumstances. And those circumstances could be, a roommate, or alone, or with 4 kids, that while we're doing this, the kids are behind, are circling.
Yeah.
So that empathy is critically important.
Yeah, it's so great too, because just to want to unpack a couple of things. That notion of empathy to me is so critical. And in a couple of other interviews that I've done, we've talked about this notion of now in our current world of work, there's this, we're building all of these operations on top of things that might have worked and might not have worked in the past. And so it's almost like this foundation of Jello that we're building organizations on. And
Right.
that ability to help people get through that and understand that, it's okay to go through what you're going through is really powerful. And just recently I watched a video, and I know I'm a late comer to this, but Brene Brown did this video on vulnerability on empathy, and understanding the difference between sympathy and empathy. It's just super powerful. And I don't know, it just brings up to me that idea that as a leader, we have to make sure that we understand the difference. So I'm curious about, this idea of teamwork, right? I know you mentioned, right, that teams are needing to really think about and deal with how they solve problems differently. But how are they, or how could they foster an even greater sense of team, given that we're not all sitting together?
Yeah, really great question. And one of the things that I have found, and one of the things that has been proven through research of teams, is that teams produce more, they generate great ideas, they're more innovative when they have a familiarity with each other, meaning that they connect on a personal level. Because it is that personal connection that gives them a comfort for each other, so they don't have to mask. When teams have a connection with each other, they're okay with throwing out a half-baked idea, and someone else in the team can pick it up and continue the thought. They're okay with misspeaking or saying, I don't know. And all of these things, particularly in this virtual environment, they're critically important to getting to the best outcomes. And so I really think that when there is a connection between the team members, and that everyone is understanding that our goal and our objective requires everyone to check ego at the door, or there's no longer a conference room door, but check ego before we come into this virtual place.
Right.
And that we collectively focus on what our objective is, and that we can win together. I think when that is there, that really changes the dynamic of the team. So all of that superficiality, it's removed, and people can come into meetings and they are focused. They're laser focused on the objectives. I think that is so critically important, and it's so, the only word that I can think of is beautiful. It's so beautiful that when you see people, that they are able to work together so harmoniously and in that manner.
Yeah, it's pretty magical. And I think that...
Great word.
Yeah, thanks. I think that it makes me remember a couple of things that, when we're working virtually, I feel like we can have that laser focus, because we don't have to worry about, how we're looking or who's watching us or any of those other things as much. The other thing that I've noticed is in these kind of virtual conversations, there's there's almost two conversations going on, or three sometimes. There's the people talking, then there's the chat that's going on the side,
Yeah.
right? And then there's sometimes even sort of backdoor conversations. And in a live meeting session, three conversations at the same time would be like, that's a bozo no-no. You can't do that.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
in a virtual conversation, it actually enhances and deepens the conversation sometimes. So
Yes.
I really appreciate that notion of really being able to be familiar. Um, and I wonder, right, if we have this conversation again in a year, if we'll see a difference in engagement, right? The sort of that I feel like I have a friend at work, or I feel like my coworker is behind me, or supports me, based on the fact that we've actually gone through this or these pandemics together.
Yeah, I think that if we have this conversation in a year, it will be different if a couple of things happen. And those things are, in addition to just having connections for work, the leader has to find ways to connect the team outside of meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a number of leaders are doing like virtual water cooler conversations. And those are just informal conversations. There are some teams that are doing virtual happy hours, and they're doing, virtual scavenger hunts. They're doing things that are outside of the context of meetings and business. But what that does, it allows, to my earlier point, people to connect. And when those connection happens, you see such magic, to your point, happening when people come back to those business meetings.
Yeah, that's interesting. It also makes me think of all the work that's done, or all the communication that's done on things like Slack, and how that can be a very interesting method to get to know your teammates as well, depending on how it's leveraged, right?
Yeah.
But that's fascinating, right? That notion of it, you still need to have that human connection in order
absolutely.
to, right, foster good teamwork.
Absolutely.
Right, even through the ether that we play in today.
Absolutely.
So, right, as you kind of, and I know you're a change expert, and that's one of the things that you focus on a great deal. And we are in a constant state of change, and now I would probably call it a hyper state of change, right? This sort of VUCA world that we live in, all this volatility and uncertainty and complexity. So as a leader, maybe even as an individual, but let's start as a leader, how do we ensure, or how do we get better at dealing with this constant state of change?
Yeah, I think we get better, Anil, by one, acknowledging that this is our new dynamic. And by that, what I mean is leaders have to become so comfortable with the fact that the control that we are so accustomed to having in a normal work dynamic, that it's gone. And again, when I think about, these three crises that we're in, it removed all control. But what it caused us to do is to rise up and to meet a new challenge. And so I really think that leaders really have to focus on being comfortable saying, hey, this is a new terrain for all of us, and we're going to seek the answers together. If you are the leader who feels, because I am the VP, the director, or whatever, that I have to come to the table and present all the solutions, you're going to be in, I'll go 7 on you, a mess of trouble. You're going to have to be able to come together as a team and say, here's our challenge. Let's pull in our collective intelligence and let's work to resolve this issue, and be comfortable knowing that as a leader, that result or that solution may not come from me. I typically don't. Most of the people I have on my team are smarter than me. So I want it to come from the collective intelligence. Just the power of that, right? When you bring all of your team members together and everyone rally around a particular issue and start to brainstorm and get a resolution.
Yeah, that's so right. So they've got to acknowledge it, that it's going to be, this is the new normal. Bring people, bring the collective knowledge together, and come out with a better solution as a group, as a team.
Absolutely. And also be able to pivot and change and move, right? Just think about all the things that we've been thrusted into over the last, couple of months. And I have seen leaders who had to reinvent themselves in the moment so that they could respond to the crisis. And what that also meant for them, and means for a lot of us, is that I may have to make a decision with, let's say, 70% of the available information, because things are moving so fast that I don't have time to go and get a deeper analysis.
Right.
And so that I have seen leaders who require analysis really struggle with that. But now they're having to rise to the occasion to change on a constant and move forward with just enough information and discover as they move forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It almost makes me feel like we live in an agile world now,
Look, the real agile world.
Yes. Yeah. Like, and it's funny too, because, that notion of being able to iterate and measure and pivot and right, that's something that we've talked about for a long time, sort of large in organizations.
Yes.
And I can only imagine that as a leader, we need to be able to do that and to acknowledge, right? Like, this isn't working. That decision I made, that was a bad decision.
Exactly.
Let's do this instead.
Right.
The other thing that it makes me think about is this idea of, and I know we're going to talk about this in a moment, but right, this idea of inclusion in a way that we haven't really kind of faced or had to deal with before, because we live in a virtual world now, making sure that everyone has a voice, right? So we're all on the same screen, and we want to make sure that Debbie and Ron and everybody has their say. So how do we? And I know, like I said, we're going to talk about inclusion in kind of a little bit of a different bent, but I wonder in this respect, how do we make sure that we're making room for everybody?
Yeah. And one of the things that I just want to highlight as I answer that is making the room is so important, because what I've seen over the last couple of months is the impact of this box on introverts, right? On introverts, and how this drains their energy. Because you are in this space and you're on, and you are having to come up out of yourself in a different way than you would have to in a traditional office setting. And so I've had many conversations with introverts who just talk to me about either I can't get my voice in, or I'm hesitant to step forward, or how much this drains their energy.
Yeah, yeah.
And so as the leader, to your point, make certain that inclusion is there, because you don't want to lose that diversity of thought, right? Because that's going to help with the problem solving and all the other things that we talked about before. But the leader has to be moderating and facilitating at the same time, and have to make certain that they are finding ways that are not off-putting to pull me into the conversation. And so it could be general. One of the things that I've done, that I'm doing, is this does give you the opportunity to read body language and faces in a different way, right? And so when there is something that is said, there have been instances where I can say, you know, hey, judging from some of your facial expressions, it appears that you may not be in agreement with the direction that we are going. Can you share some of what you're feeling about this topic or the decision that we've made? And I've seen people come forward in those instances. So I'm not calling them out, but then there are certain personality types that wouldn't be off-putting. It wouldn't be off-putting for me to do that. So with you, I know that I can say, Anil, it looks like you're challenging that thought. Can you tell me more?
Yeah.
And you would be able to articulate what you're thinking and feeling. But leaders have to be very aware of the group dynamic and reading body language and including people.
Really interesting. It's really interesting because I think that it opens the door to this broader conversation about inclusion. And you know, one of the things, so I've been doing these interviews now for a little while, and talked to a lot of smart folks like yourself who have talked a lot about this idea of diversity of thought and ensuring that everyone has a voice. And so as you kind of look within your own organization, but sort of and outside with colleagues that you have externally, why do you think inclusion matters so much now?
Oh, absolutely. Wonderful question. It matters on a number of levels, but I want to go back to the statement of diversity of thought, because I think that is more than just a cool word or phrase to say, right? It has such a deeper meaning. When you think about having the perspective from people based on their unique and individual experience, and how they are able to bring that unique and individual experience into the conversation that advances the business objective, it's powerful.
Yeah.
It helps us to think in ways that we've not done before. You know, based on my unique background, I have a different perspective of things, and how that perspective can blend with the conversation so that we can get to a better result. I think that is so critically important. I also think inclusion is important from the perspective that everyone, depending on the business we're in, certainly mine, everyone in that room, they represent the diverse customer base that we have. Mm-hmm. So working on a marketing plan, there's a different view and perspective that comes into play. But it is also, you want to get the best of everyone. And having people use their voice and be included in the conversation, it helps them to bring forth their best so that the organization is put in a much better state.
Yeah, that's that notion of bringing that diversity of thought to accelerate business objectives is such a a powerful thing. And how do we in our organization intentionally foster that way of operating, both at a leadership level, but also as an individual? So how can we help to kind of amplify that a little bit?
Yeah, it goes back to some basic fundamentals. And one of those is I fundamentally believe that everyone has value and something to offer, right? So I love your word magic. The real magic in organizations, it starts with understanding that people are our greatest asset, and that in order to get the best from people, you've got to give them a platform and an opportunity to, one, understand what their aspirations are, and then help them to exercise that muscle by bringing them into conversations that may be outside of the box for them, bringing them into places and decisions that may be reserved for other leaders in the organization. That is such a powerful and significant way to really make certain that you are growing your people, you're giving them value, and that you're giving them a platform so that they can really advance.
That's interesting. And that notion of providing them that space to be whoever they are, right, when they're
Yes.
coming to the conversation. And as we're kind of shifting into this sort of hybrid way of working, and how do we make sure that that employee experience continues to be an area of focus for organizations? Because like you said, right, I mean, people are they're our most important asset, and right, just kind of fundamentally, they are the engines of growth now more than ever.
Yes.
So what can we do as organizations to really ensure in this future of work that we're enhancing that employee experience?
Yeah, no, if you think about our conversation, that while we talk about the strategies or the strategic objectives of the organization, we keep coming back to the value of people, right? If you this whole conversation, we keep coming back to that. And so in order to really do what you just talked about, it is really coming back to understanding, if I want to improve the employee experience, and it is one thing for me to show you my my survey scores, right?
Right.
But it is another thing to really get to know me and understand what is my experience in this organization that may be outside or on the edge of what your survey questions are. Because those are the things that are going to keep me engaged and to keep me in this organization. It's my experience. And you cannot understand my experience without connecting with me to understand, what is my aspiration? What is it that I really want to do, you know, in terms of my career and my next steps? I think that when leaders take the time to understand that as they move up in the organization, their technical prowess and abilities and intelligence, it flips. And those soft skills become the most important as the leader of the organization. And so they need to invest their time understanding what makes Anil tick, what is Quentin's desire, and then having to thread that and create pathways for us to get there. that is what's going to keep employees engaged and retained in organizations.
It's really powerful, that notion of understanding what's at the edge of that experience and what is it that drives or enables that person to be successful, and to be attentive, and to do all those things that you need them to do without them being right next to you.
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful. So it's awesome. So one last question, and just curious, right? You're exploring and looking and learning. I'm wondering, what's one area of focus that you're looking to gain more knowledge about or explore currently? What's one thing that you're working on currently?
Wow, there are many, but one thing that I will point out is we are spending a lot of time with our organization, with our leaders, and with our organizations, really talking about who we are as an organization and our values based on what's happening in the world, right? And what is our responsibility? What is the corporation's responsibility to systemic racism? What is the corporation's responsibility to women that are underrepresented, in positions that really matter and that have real authority in the organization? So we're really doing a double click on what our placard values are and how it bumps up against our organizational behaviors. Are they aligned, right? So that's where I'm spending a lot of times. And I got to tell you, the conversations are fascinating. They are uncomfortable. They are really stretching leaders into places that they are afraid to go, not because their heart isn't there, but because they don't want to mess up. They don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And so it is being able to create that space where leaders of all levels can say, here are my values, but when it comes to talking about these things in a public forum, I am afraid, Quentin. Help me through this. How do I talk through this? And my answer has always been to them, you've already said it. Talk your values. Talk your values and how your values align to what the organization values are, and what are the values and the behaviors that you expect throughout your organization, and how you will hold people accountable to those.
Very powerful. So powerful. I mean, that whole notion of connecting values to action and accountability and outcomes, and I think that's such an interesting trajectory. And I also appreciate the fact that it's not, and I know this isn't something you do, but it's not lip service, right? It's not like the placard on the wall. It really is, where does the rubber hit the road?
Exactly.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, it would be awesome once you get down a path to have a conversation about that, because we're seeing right in this conversation about the future of work that's really a core tenet of what people are looking for, especially right the younger generation. They don't want to work for companies that are going to burn the earth down.
Yeah. Can I just say this really quickly? What is very interesting in this time, and when I say this time, pre-COVID, for the last couple of years, is that when we are interviewing candidates for roles, it is interesting that when we say, do you have any questions? And their question is, tell me about your corporate social responsibility objectives. They want to know how do you contribute to the environment, to social justice? It is not like when I was asking many years ago, but those are questions that leaders didn't see coming. But with the new generations that are coming into the workforce, they don't want to work for a company that does not have a very clearly stated corporate social responsibility objectives.
That's fascinating, that idea of really caring about that, and that being that transparent to me. I think,
Yes.
right, that notion of that really matters to me, and that we in organizations have to be much more clear about the impact that we have and that we want to have moving forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. But well, I mean, to me, that there's a whole nother conversation we could have about that, right?
Right.
But that's awesome. So, Quentin, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us today. Really interesting information, and I think exciting look at how we can really take those lessons to enhance our leadership ability, and drive that inclusion within our organizations.
Absolutely. Listen, it was great being with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Right on. Thanks a lot.